split second when an accusation lands, your stomach drops, your pulse quickens, and every fiber of your being screams to explain, to justify. To set the record straight, that's the exact moment you hand them the keys to your composure. You didn't ask to be put on trial, yet here you are, mentally gathering evidence, constructing a defense, preparing your closing argument. But here's what nobody tells you. The verdict was decided the moment you decided to plead your case. Nobody remembers the eloquent defense. They remember the image of someone scrambling to prove their worth. Every day, someone takes a shot at your character, and every day you react on autopilot, playing a rigged game. That stops now. I'm going to give you a psychological framework so potent, so unshakable, that from this day forward, no critique, no insult, no public challenge will ever force you to break your frame. This is the art of becoming legally, psychologically, and emotionally immune to the opinions of those who have no jurisdiction over your life. Why explanation is voluntary surrender. Let's cut through the comfort and straight to the truth. Every time you explain yourself to someone who has already made up their mind, you are not seeking understanding. You are broadcasting your own insecurity. When you defend, you confirm the attack had power. Imagine a sovereign ruler. A citizen shouts an insult from the crowd. Does the ruler halt the procession, call for a scribe, and dictate a rebuttal? Number. The ruler's gaze passes through the accuser as if they were made of glass. That indifference isn't arrogance, it's the gravity that holds the throne in place. Niccolo Machiavelli observed that a leader who stops to argue with every critic spends their entire tenure in the courtroom of public opinion, never actually governing. Defense isn't a strategy for strength, it's a posture of submission dressed in the language of logic. The second you utter the words "that's not fair," or "let me clarify," you've telegraphed to everyone watching that the accusation struck a nerve, that it found purchase. And in the silent mathematics of power, a flinch is a loss. People don't archive arguments, they archive emotions. They remember who looked rattled and who remained still. Who could assemble the most flawless, airtight rebuttal in human history, and it would dissolve into mist. Why? Because the image of you standing there, justifying your existence to a peer, has already cemented you as the defendant in their memory. This is your first and most brutal lesson. Explanation is a trap. The powerful don't explain. They exist. They let the weight of their actions create a gravity so strong that accusations can't escape its pull. The invisible hook. Now, let's dissect the machinery of manipulation, because understanding the mechanism disarms the weapon. When someone attacks you publicly, their stated goal is rarely their real goal. They are not seeking truth or clarity. They already have their narrative. What they are really after is your emotional data. They want to see the algorithm of your psyche crash, your frustration, your need to correct the records that the trophies they came to collect. It's a form of psychological extraction. Dark psychology operates on a fundamental principle: control the reaction, control the person. They cast a line with a sharp hook, not because they're hungry, but because they want to see you thrash. They want the audience to witness you struggle against the line. The accusation was just the bait. Your reaction was the catch. This is how control artists have operated since the first tribes formed. They don't need to overpower you physically or outthink you strategically. They just need you to feel something so intensely that you abandon your strategic mind. The instant your composure fractures, you are no longer the operator, you are the operated. Machiavelli warned that enemies will always try to lure you into their arena because on their court, their rules apply. By defending yourself, you have accepted the venue. You walked into their courtroom, sat at the defendant's table, and are now waiting for their verdict. In their courtroom, you were always meant to lose. The art of strategic silence. So if defense is defeat, what's the alternative when the fire comes? You do the one thing their entire strategy depends on you not doing. You give them a void. Absolute, calculated, unnerving silence. Not the silence of being stunned or speechless. The silence of a king who has heard the accusation, assessed the accuser, and found both unworthy of a response. This is strategic silence, and it is the most devastating countermove in the psychological arsenal. When you meet an attack with silence, the energy in the room inverts. The accuser had a script they rehearsed for your outburst. Their whole plan hinged on you opening your mouth and filling the space with your own desperation. When you don't, their architecture collapses. Suddenly they're exposed, standing alone, holding a burning match with nothing to ignite. The audience doesn't look at you with doubt, they look at you with curiosity. Because silence speaks a language words cannot. It says, your opinion is not on my level. It says, this accusation is so irrelevant that acknowledging it would be a downgrade to my reality. Silence is a mirror that shows the accuser their own smallness. Psychological studies confirm that silence triggers a deep cognitive dissonance in the attacker. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures. We expect action-reaction. When the reaction is absent, the brain short-circuits. It projects. It fills the void with doubt, insecurity, and fear. Your silence becomes their interrogation. Machiavelli did not advocate for silence because it was peaceful. He advocated for it because it was lethal. The person who masters strategic silence doesn't dodge conflict, he controls its very existence. Reframing the battlefield. But silence is your fortress, not your only weapon. There are times when the game requires you to speak. When you do, you must never defend. You reframe. Reframing is the act of catching the accusation, turning it over, and handing it back so cleanly that the original thrower suddenly finds themselves holding something heavy. Someone calls you ruthless. You don't say, no, I'm compassionate. You pause, look them in the eye and say, it's interesting that you mistake focus for cruelty. That's a reframe. You didn't justify your actions, you questioned their perception. You shifted the spotlight from your alleged flaw to their need to project it. You haven't given them a drop of emotional fuel. This is Machiavellian precision at its peak. The prince doesn't answer the charge, he questions the character of the one who brought it. Dark psychology teaches us that every public attack has a hidden intent. When you expose that intent without anger, you don't just win the exchange, you disarm the attacker in front of the jury. They operated in shadows, and you just turned on the lights. Reframing demands one thing most people lack: a pause. That half-second of stillness between the trigger and your response is where your future is forged. React emotionally, and you're a puppet. Pause and reframe, and you become the puppeteer. The room doesn't follow the loudest voice, it follows the most controlled one. The person who can absorb an insult, pause, and redirect the entire conversation without a flicker of anger is the most dangerous person in any room. He doesn't fight fires, he decides which fires are allowed to burn. The law of compelled approach. Robert Greene articulated a law that most skim but few internalize. Always make the other person come to you. This isn't just for boardrooms, it's for every interaction where power is negotiated. When someone attacks you, they are pulling you toward their territory. They want you chasing their narrative, running after their approval. And the moment you chase, you've signaled that they set the value, and you are the supplicant. Now imagine the inverse. Imagine a person who is attacked and simply continues building. They say nothing. They alter nothing. They don't look back. What follows is pure psychological compulsion. The accuser becomes fixated. The silence eats at them. They escalate, get louder, more desperate. Still, they meet a wall of immovable calm. Eventually, they come to you. They always come to you, because a person who cannot be moved becomes a mystery. And the human mind cannot tolerate an unsolved mystery. Machiavelli understood that power is gravity, not force. The sun doesn't chase the planets, its mass demands their orbit. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop chasing, you become that center of gravity. People orbit you, not because you demanded it, but because your stillness creates a pull there chaos cannot resist. Let them shout into the void. The void doesn't answer. The void doesn't care. And that is precisely why the void always wins. Building the inner citadel. Here is the truth that stings. Your emotions are your most exploitable vulnerability. Every person who has ever controlled you did so by accessing your emotional wiring. They found the circuit connected to your need for approval, your fear of being misjudged, your hunger for validation, and they flipped the switch whenever they wanted to see you squirm. This is why emotional detachment isn't coldness, it's survival. The Stoics built an empire on this. Marcus Aurelius ruled amidst constant betrayal and conspiracy. Didn't survive because he fought every battle, he survived because he chose which battles deserved his energy and let the rest dissolve into irrelevance. That's the armor you must forge. Not a shield of arrogance, but a calm, unshakable awareness that what others say about you is their data, not your truth. Dark psychology reveals that manipulators always test before they target. They toss out a small provocation, A subtle dig, a passive-aggressive comment, and they watch. They're mapping your triggers. If you react to the probe, they know you'll collapse under the main assault. But if you absorb it like a mountain absorbs wind, they flag you as high risk, low reward, and move on. Emotional detachment isn't feeling nothing, it's no longer being controlled by what you feel. There's a fire inside every person. The weak let it burn wild and call it passion. The dangerous bank it, contain it, and only release it when the target is specific and the timing is perfect. Feel everything, react to nothing. That's not suppression, that's supreme command. Reading the architecture, not the words. Here is where the average mind fails and where you will operate on a different plane. Most people listen to language. They hear an insult and respond to the insult. They hear praise and accept the praise. They live on the surface, reading the cover of the book. You are going to read the binding, the publication date, and the author's intent. When someone critiques you publicly, the vocabulary is irrelevant. What matters is the timing, the audience, and the currency they're trying to extract. Dark psychology frames every interaction as a transaction. No one speaks without a purpose. The coworker who questions your numbers in a meeting isn't confused about math, they're positioning themselves in the hierarchy. The friend who brings up an old failure at a celebration isn't reminiscing. They're feeling the heat of your current success and using the past as a cold compress to keep you small. Machiavelli wrote that a wise prince studies intentions more carefully than declarations. Declarations are the smoke, intentions are the fire. When you train yourself to see the invisible structure under every conversation, you stop reacting to noise and start decoding strategy. 2. Become the person who sees the chessboard while everyone else sees checkers. You don't get ambushed because you saw the move 3 turns before it was made. Reputation, the fortress that speaks. There is a stratum of power where you no longer need to silence critics because your history does it for you. Machiavelli held reputation as the most precious currency, more potent than wealth, more formidable than armies. When your name precedes you, and that name carries weight, the game is already half won. No one casually accuses a person whose documented reality makes the accusation absurd on arrival. Think about that. If someone calls a decorated veteran a coward, the room doesn't turn to the veteran for proof. It turns to the accuser with skepticism because the claim contradicts the established pattern. That is the fortress you must build, not with arguments but with undeniable results, stacked so high that any criticism looks like a tiny shadow at their base. Dark psychology confirms that humans judge credibility through pattern recognition. If every data point associated with your name signals discipline and capability, then a single accusation doesn't just fail, it backfires. It becomes the accuser's humiliation because the audience already has a mental file on you, and nothing in that file supports the charge. This is why Machiavelli urged a prince to guard his reputation more fiercely than his borders. Borders can be retaken, armies can be rebuilt, but a reputation once fractured takes a lifetime to restore. Stop wasting energy debating people who add nothing to your legacy. Pour that energy into becoming so demonstrably excellent that your existence is the only argument you'll ever need. Build a name that echoes when you're silent. Build a record that defends you while you sleep. That's not ambition, that's architectural genius. The long game and strategic patience. Every impulsive reaction is a surrender to the timeline of others. Patience is not passive. Patience is the most aggressive form of strategy because it requires you to see the horizon while everyone else is sprinting toward a mirage. Machiavelli studied rulers who conquered not through speed, but through timing. They watched enemies exhaust themselves. They let coalitions crumble naturally. They waited for the precise fault line to appear, and only then did they move swiftly, decisive, and final. That's the long game, and the long game is where lasting power resides. Dark psychology reveals something crucial about impulsivity. When you react instantly, you're operating from the oldest, least strategic part of your brain, the part designed for survival, not sovereignty. You're running on adrenaline, not intelligence. Every word spoken in that state is a liability, but the person who absorbs the blow, files it and waits for the optimal moment to respond or not respond at all, is playing cognitive chess. He isn't ignoring the offense, he's investing it. He's letting time do what arguments never can. Time exposes falsehoods. Time humiliates the reckless. Time vindicates the one who had the discipline to hold. The Stoics called this the discipline of delay. Machiavelli called it strategic patience. Call it the difference between winning a skirmish and winning the war. Stop reacting to moments. Start engineering outcomes. The patient player doesn't play faster, he plays longer. And the one who plays longest eventually collects everything. Integration, becoming untouchable. You have now walked through the fire that most avoid. You see what they don't. Defense is a trap. Silence is dominion. Reframing is warfare. Detachment is armor. Reading intent is intelligence. Reputation is a fortress. Patience is a weapon that leaves no fingerprints. But here is the final seal, the one that makes you untouchable. You must commit. Not when it's easy. Not when conditions are perfect. Now. Because knowledge without execution is just noise, and you didn't come here for noise. From this second forward, you are not the person who explains themselves to those who were never listening. You are not the person who shrinks to make others feel tall. You are not the person who chases approval from mouths that have never spoken your name with honor. That version is finished. Leave it behind tonight. The person who replaces him doesn't argue, he observes. He doesn't react, he calculates. He doesn't beg for validation, he builds a life so substantial that validation comes knocking without an invitation. Machiavelli wrote for princes, but the principles are for anyone with the discipline to wield them. Dark psychology isn't about manipulation, it's about awareness, seeing the game everyone is playing and choosing your moves with precision instead of panic. Stoicism isn't about extinguishing your fire, it's about directing that fire with surgical intent, so only what you intend to burn is consumed. You are now the person who enters a room and alters its atmosphere without a single word. You are the one who cannot be baited, cannot be rattled, cannot be diminished by the opinions of those who have built nothing worth defending. You are untouchable. Now, I want you to mark this moment. Drop a comment with the words, "My silence is my signature." Let that be your declaration that the old self is gone. If this transmission activated something in you that's been dormant, hit that like button and tell the algorithm to spread this frequency. Subscribe to Winds of Thought, because this won't be the last time you need these codes. And turn on notifications so you're first to receive every new dispatch. The campaign for your own sovereignty has already started. Now go. Make them remember your stillness longer than they ever remembered their noise.